Hello and welcome to Spokane County Spotlight. I'm Commissioner Al French, and my guests today are Gerry Gemmill, Spokane County Chief Executive Officer, and Tonya Wallace, Spokane County Chief Budget Officer. Welcome, Gerry and Tonya.
Thank you.
So today we're focusing on the 2018 Spokane County budget process. Along with my guest today, we're going to give a presentation starting with a historical overview of Spokane County budget and the events that have led us up to this point. Then we'll discuss the approach we're taking at the county to address the budget shortfalls and adoption process. Before we get started, Gerry, would you give our audience a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Al. I worked at the county for 33 years. I started as a road laborer. I left the county in 2008, went to work for the city of Spokane for 5.5 years, then went to Whitworth for 2 years, and back at the county and been there for about 1.5 years.
Very good, thank you. And Tonya, you're new to the county. How about a little bit of background about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Al. I am new to the county, but I do have quite a long history with government finance. I've had nearly 25 years in government finance. First as a general financial advisor for a lot of municipalities, different kinds of municipalities throughout the Pacific Northwest, but primarily in Idaho. And then I spent more than 18 years working at the city of Boise, where I served as a financial services manager and oversaw the budget process, accounting, treasury functions, debt issuance, and purchasing. So I'm very pleased to be working and serving the residents of Spokane County now.
Well, and we're happy to have you with us and stuff. So let's get started with our discussion about the 2018 Spokane County budget process. To start things off, I'd like to lay a little bit of a foundation for our conversation. As it has been reported in the news, we have spoken about our recent public budget hearings, and addressing the budget for the 2018 is going to be a very challenging process. We had hoped to put the November ballot a levy lid lift with the expectation to get some direction from the voters regarding their priorities. One option would have been to approve a levy lid lift, which would have allowed the county to maintain services. The other option would have been to reject the levy lid lift, which would have directed us to cut services and live within our current means. Counties across the state are fiscally challenged because of a variety of different reasons, whether it's because of voter-approved initiatives, unfunded mandates, annexations and incorporations, or the reduction in shared revenues that we get from the state of Washington and the Growth Management Act. Commissioner Kearns and I have committed ourselves to a transparent budget process for 2018. Thus far, we've held 2 public budget hearings in the previous weeks, and we have been speaking to audiences throughout the county and have been engaged with the media. So in an effort to continue our community engagement about this 2018 budget, Gerry, can you begin by giving the audience a little introduction as to the history of Spokane County budget?
I'd be glad to, thank you. We're going to talk about, if you look, as you can see on the screen, Spokane County budget is, for 2017, is almost $700 million. It's split into internal services, the enterprise funds, which are things like the golf course, the road funds, utilities, and we have, but what I want to focus on today, because this is the critical challenge for us, is the general fund, which makes up 25% of the budget. And under the general fund are things that you have for like auditor, assessors, county commissioner office, building maintenance, data processing, health district, parks, and that's those types of activities. As you can see on the slide here, the general fund services accounts for just shy of $172 million. And it's split up there. You can see that detention services, the sheriff's office, the prosecutor, public defender. I think it's significant to notice that in the general budget, 3/4 or 75% of that budget has something to do with the criminal justice system. And general government makes up the other 25%. And some of those are the elected offices that they contain things that we are required by the state to do, such as the assessor, hold elections, and other things.
I think it's important to point out too that In the United States, there are only 5 states
Yes.
that require that the criminal justice system, including the court system, is paid for at the local level. In the other 45 states, that's all a responsibility of the state. So a lot of the responsibilities that you would traditionally think of as state responsibilities, we serve as the agent for the state, whether it's the auditor, the treasurer, the assessor, all of these functions we provide on behalf of the state.
That's a very good point. And I think part of the challenge is that in trying to provide those services on behalf of the state, sometimes what we're required to do, or many times I should say, the funding to adequately do those isn't forthcoming from the state, which is a challenge for all, not just our county, it's a challenge for all counties.
Well, that's a great lead into this next slide, Gerry. Really what the general fund is plagued with is a structural gap. And that is simply when our revenues over time are growing at a slower pace than our expenditures. And as this illustration points out, our revenues are projected to grow, assuming a modest economic environment, at only 2.3%. While expenditures, however, will be growing at 3.4%, assuming status quo in our service levels.
Well, and that's important because we don't have the flexibility that cities have in terms of responding to either economic downturns or when the economy is recovering and it's a consumer-driven economy, they see a greater increase in sales tax revenue than the counties do. And this is not unique to just Spokane County. Counties across the state have been struggling with this fundamental flaw in the funding structure for county governments for many years. And it's now reaching a point to where it is the #1 priority for counties in the state of Washington.
So some of the general fund revenues, as you notice on the slide over on the left-hand side, more than 58% of all of the general fund revenues come from property tax and sales tax. This has been especially a challenge, as you said, Al, with the cities having some access to different revenue sources than the counties do, is a lot of our viewers probably remember that we've had a number of initiatives, starting with the IMAN initiative that lowered the motor vehicle tax, took quite a bit of revenues from the county. Health District was one of the big hitters. Then, of course, we had, and we'll get into this a little more later, you had the 1% cap on the property tax, and as Tonya was showing in her slide, when your revenues are artificially capped and they can't keep up with your expenses, it's what we call a broken business model. Doesn't matter what business you're in, it's just very hard to maintain that type of a business model.
And to piggyback on that, Initiative 747 was the initiative back in the early 2000s that put a 1% cap on the growth rate of property taxes from year to year. And the only modification to that is new development, new construction that comes on the books. Well, it's interesting, initially that applied to cities, counties, and the state. But this year, the state removed itself from that requirement and allowed itself to grow property taxes at a greater rate so they could solve their McCleary decision, but left cities and counties capped at that 1%. And when you have simple inflation that's growing faster than the 1%, it doesn't take a business genius to figure out that you're going to fall behind.
That's right. Well, this graph shows, I mean, it really illustrates what we're talking about. You can see around 2002, when the effects of Initiative 747 had actually hit the property tax, that rise in revenues in those years from 2003 to roughly 2008 were being fueled by the housing boom. And you know, even with the property tax capped at 1%, that we were, you know, bringing in a lot of taxes because we were bringing new construction on. Then you notice, and I find this real interesting, and everybody realizes that the Great Recession hit everybody really hard. If you look at our revenues from 2007 to almost 2014, before the board had decided that they had to do something, and they went in and they used the road levy shift. And I want to be very clear to everybody, not the road money. It was the capacity in the road levy. Those revenues are basically flat for 7 years. I mean, it's just incredible.
they're flat during that period of time, but the number of responsibilities
Didn't
the
go
state
down.
continues to impose upon the county, and the number of responsibilities that happen just as a result of natural growth in the county, they continue to increase.
I want to point out in this slide, even though we're talking about property taxes, it's good to put it in perspective for the taxpayer, where the county is an agency of the state and collects property taxes on behalf of many other taxing districts, schools and the cities and specialty districts. But only 10% of those property tax revenues actually are used to support county services. And as this chart shows here on the right side, that for every $1,000 of assessed valuation, only $1.37 of that comes in to support those county services. So, or as the chart on the left shows, really only 10% of their entire tax bill, even though the county has to collect all of those taxes and then disperse them to all the taxing agencies. So that just kind of puts it in perspective of when we talk about these change in property taxes and what is really going on and what portion of that total bill is really for county services.
Well, and the interesting thing too is that as a result of the decision to fund McCleary through the property tax, the actual increase in annual assessments for property taxes will go up. I think we averaged at about 87 cents per
right.
thousand for
Yes.
next year. And so you look at that one-time expense for the school districts and you compare that to the $1.37 that the county gets to fund everything that we provide from the courts and everything else. It's a pretty significant jump, and that's one of the reasons why Commissioner Kearns and I felt that keeping our levied lid lift proposition on the ballot for November was just too heavy a burden. And we wanted to have an unbiased direction from the voters in terms of telling us which direction to go. And with that kind of burden facing them that they did not have a say in, the legislature just imposed that tax. That's one of the reasons why we stepped back and we said, you know, we will find a way to get through 18. But in 2018, we will probably have the levied lid lift back on the ballot to get some direction from our voters as to what level of county government services do they want to fund.
Right.
As we were talked about earlier, the main sources of revenue for county operations general fund are property tax and sales tax. And this graph shows that, you know, the sales tax that the counties received, you know, is you notice that prior to the annexations of Spokane Valley and the city of Liberty Lake, our revenues were around $35 million. Well, you can notice that after the incorporations of those two cities, that the revenue from sales tax, you know, significantly dropped to the tune of about $8 million in sales tax revenues. And then you notice that we start to kind of come out of that in the 2005, 6, 7 period, and we get back up there to where we're looking a little bit better. And then the North Division annexation happened. Now a lot of folks remember that annexation is referred to as the Costco annexation, and Costco obviously was part of it. But there was a whole line of businesses that were running down Division Street that were taken in the city's annexation, and the neighborhoods that those revenues support services in, the county kept the neighborhoods, but the sales tax base went away, and that was significant. And then as you go through here, you can see that it's kind of a declining after the North Division annexation, and then the West Plains annexation is also happened, which happened later. And that was, you know, another hit to our sales tax revenue. And I think what's significant is you can see the straight line that's running from just about the beginning of 2008 to 2015. That's a 7-year period where those revenues are basically flat. But we're still required to provide the services. Our population is still growing. The demands are still there. The unfunded mandates don't stop. And it's a significant burden on the county to try to figure out how to keep those services at the level our people expect them to be.
Well, and prior to the Growth Management Act, I mean, the cities and the counties both had retail centers that generated sales tax to drive services. And through the Growth Management Act and through some decisions to encourage annexations, a lot of those retail sales tax generators auto dealers, recreational vehicle dealerships, Costco's and big box stores like that, they all got annexed into the municipalities. And so that was a revenue shift that happened from the counties to the cities. But with that revenue, the responsibilities did not follow the revenue. So the responsibility stayed with the county, the revenues went with the city. It's important also to note that the counties only have two main revenue streams. You've got property tax and sales tax, where the cities actually have four different stools to the leg, if you will, or legs to the stool, about how they fund themselves. They've got property tax, sales tax, they also have a utility tax, and they have business licenses. So they've got four ways to be able to fund their operations. Counties are limited to two, and of the two, one's capped at 1%, and the other is diminished because of annexations.
That's a very good point.
I think, Al and Gerry, this slide really represents the issue when we talk about annexation and sales tax and that dynamic between the county and the cities. This shows total sales tax, and obviously most of the sales tax that is actually collected goes to the state. But what really is important in terms of the county and the city dynamic is whether those purchases are happening in the unincorporated area, which is why annexation affects this, or if they're happening within the city limits. Certainly the chart on the left shows what happens when a $1,000 purchase happens inside the city limits, where only 2% or $1.50 on that $1,000 purchase goes to the county. But if the same $1,000 purchase were to happen in the unincorporated area, it'd be 11% of that sales tax collected goes to the county, or $10. That's a difference of $1.50 to $10 in sales tax. And that is very significant, and why the county is so concerned when annexations occur.
With both the sales tax and the property tax as our main revenue sources, slow economic growth obviously has a huge effect, especially on the counties. As you said, Commissioner, we don't have access to utility tax, we don't levy business taxes to kind of even those slow economic periods out. And as this chart shows, that, and again I'll point to 2008, when your general operating revenues are around 138 or just shy of $139 million, look at how long it's gone. Go to 2014. That's just almost a flat line in those revenues. And again, I want to stress, in a way, we're almost a victim of our own success, because even though the expenditures don't go away, the board, our board, we've been fortunate to have really good boards that have figured out ways, along with our employees, to still provide those services in a broken business model. I think part of the reason that it's so significant to have this discussion now is that you can only patch a broken business model so long because it's still broken. So on the general fund cost impacts, oops, let me get to the right slide.
There's one before that.
Oh, thank you, sir. So where does that money go? What do we spend it on? Well, as you know, we're a service industry. We serve in a variety of ways, a lot of lines of businesses, and we serve the taxpayers. And like any service organization, the majority of our expenditures are salary, wages, and benefits. And even though we've had great cooperation from our employees that are very dedicated to keep the services at a high level, there are some expenditures that we face that are out of our control. And unfunded mandates are one of those. Cost of medical goes up, cost of the retirement system goes up, and that's where the majority of the money goes for that. Now, one of the things that the general cost or general fund cost impacts, again, as you follow this line that's showing the general fund operating expenditures from 2000 to 2016. Again, I draw your attention to the line that starts, that straight line that says 152.3 million, starting in 2006, and then you go to almost 2015, 152.3 million to 156.0 0 million, that's a flat line expenditure. It's very, very difficult to operate efficiently in that particular scenario. So, it didn't happen overnight. And so the question comes, so what did you do? I mean, what have you been doing to address these things? And like I said earlier, it isn't that the board and the other electeds and the employees, haven't been working hard to try to maintain our high level of service delivery with these loss of revenues. For instance, as you can see, during the recession, we had to reduce staff. Some of that was in law enforcement. Most of the employees went 5 years with no cost of living increase. I mean, it was quite a sacrifice by our employees. Medical self-insurance plan, we are self-insured in our medical. We went to our employees and said, we need to redesign these medical plans. You have to, help us, and they did by taking on more of that cost burden on themselves. Some of the departments were reorganized. Some of the departments were eliminated during that time. And other service reductions, such as some of our departments, to keep everybody on the boat, said, you know what? We're all willing to take a cut in hours. We maybe only operate half days on Fridays. So the county has done a lot to try to address this situation.
That's right, Gerry. And certainly when we started this process in July, when the concept of the levy lid lift was being discussed, we had to start with some assumptions as we started the process for 2018. And one of those key assumptions is that we weren't going to do a road shift capacity for the third time. We've done it for 3 years, but we assumed we weren't going to do it again. But at the same time, with years of no increases in employee wages, we've settled on some union agreements. We still have some outstanding. So we've had to make certain assumptions on personnel cost increases, but we've also had other just regular business pressures placed on the county that we've assumed too. And wage increases, the workers' comp, regular inflationary cost increases. We've made some basic assumptions when we started. And where that kind of took us was our gap of about $9.5 million when we started this process of this gap. And we've pushed it to the departments and the employees to really brainstorm and help us solve this gap under this assumption model. And that's what we're in the process of doing now.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why we really wanted to engage the public in this process, because we're going to be put in a position to where we're going to have to make some critical decisions as we adopt the budget for 2018. And it's not a surprise that some services that we provide we might not be able to maintain. During the recession, we weren't able to continue to maintain neighborhood parks. So now the neighbors mow the grass and take care of the parks and stuff. So, and there's probably going to be some other services that we provide to our taxpayers that we might not be in a position to do without additional revenues, but we will find a way to get through 2018. So we have engaged in a hearing process so that we can, one, educate the public and also engage them into this process. We had a hearing on August 22nd and August 30th, where we basically made the presentation and outlined the challenges. We are now engaged with budget development and looking for economies. We have got all of our staff engaged in this process, and it's a creative endeavor, and we're looking at the things that we've done and do we need to continue to do them? What things do we do that provide value to the taxpayers, and what things do we do that are historical or legacy decisions? And so those recommendations will come to the budget office and our senior management team, and then we'll go back out to the public with a number of series of hearings so that we can engage you to look at how we're prioritizing the budget for 2018. Are our priorities in line with your expectations? Are we meeting the basic needs of our taxpayers? And as we look to develop that final budget, which has to be adopted by December 4th, that's a requirement that we have to adhere to on state compliance. We want to make sure that the budget we develop for 2018 reflects your priorities and your desires and your expectations. And the only way we can know that is for you to tell us. So we invite you to come down to the hearings when we have them. If you can't come down, please drop us an email or a letter, or in some fashion communicate to us what your desires are, so that we make sure that we can get through 2018 with the least amount of impact on our ratepayers, our taxpayers through that year. And then we'll have this conversation again the end of 2018 in terms of charting a course forward. Now, during that time, we're going to continue to work with our legislatures. The real fix to this really lies with the legislatures. They could, for instance, treat us the same way they treated themselves and remove the 1% cap. We've proposed to them a simple inflationary adjustment to the 1%. There have been some counties that have advocated for a utility tax in the unincorporated area. There have been a number of other opportunities. The other thing that really has to stress is the fact that the state could also start picking up more of their responsibilities. Quit pushing unfunded mandates down onto the local jurisdictions and forcing us to use local resources to address a state need or a state requirement. We call these unfunded mandates. And when the legislature passes a law and then forces us to pay for it, that takes resources from our taxpayers here locally to fund a state mandate. The state needs to start funding their own wish list. And I'll give you a great example of that. In this last legislative session, the legislators passed an ordinance that said that our auditor's office had to provide ballot boxes in every jurisdiction within the county. Instead of allowing voters to mail their ballots, we now have to provide a drop box, and then we have to provide a staff person and security to go pick up the ballots every single day during an election. That's probably going to cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $60,000 a year to be able to do that. That's funding that we could use on other priorities. And it's a requirement that, quite frankly, isn't needed. With the mail-in ballot process, it really isn't needed, and there's plenty of opportunities for drop boxes. So that's just one example of some of the things. One of the other things that we are required to do is provide indigent defense. Even though by state constitution, indigent defense is a responsibility of the state, they have by resolution passed that down to us without the necessary revenue to cover that expense. So we pay for that here locally. So as we work to try and adjust this budget, we'll be engaged with you and hope that you will participate with us in this process. So, you know, I'm afraid that we've run out of time here. And so I'll remind the audience that this presentation and the videos from all of our public budget hearings can be accessed on the Spokane County homepage, and you can also watch it on Spokane County YouTube channel. I'd like to thank my guests, Gerry Gemmill and Tonya Wallace, for joining us today. And I'm County Commissioner Al French, and I want to thank you for joining us today on Spokane County Spotlight.